EU5 is on everybody's lips these days, and in someone's hands. Grrr. And for good reason, it is the next grand strategy game from Paradox after all, and what a title it is. With many of us having sunk thousands of hours into EU4 over the past decade and then some, EU5 has so much to live up to. Now we know that Johan and the gang see EU5 as the grand strategy of grand strategy games, the grandest strategy if you will, and it's good to see some genuine enthusiasm from the team. Indeed, Paradox Tinto has been so open about this game that you can hardly believe it, and the willingness to implement feedback has been nothing short of amazing. But that doesn't mean the game is entirely safe just yet. In this video, we'll go through the 5 mistakes EU5 must avoid in order to truly succeed, all of them important. Number 1. The discovery of America. EU5 begins in 1337, a start date firmly planted within the late medieval era. A pivotal moment at the beginning of the game will be the Black Death and its havoc on society. But remember, this is also the beginning of the 100 Years' War. The Teutonic Order has yet to finish its crusade against Lithuania. Byzantium is more than just a city, and Constantinople has yet to fall. The Reconquista has a respectable 150 years left of good old Spanish tumbling. The Timurids have yet to invade Syria and beyond. And I know it's tough to believe, but Kingdom Come Deliverance takes place in 1403, meaning that it begins almost 70 years after EU5's start date. In other words, this is the medieval era. And I swear, if we are allowed to reach the Americas before the 1450s, or if the AI regularly and consistently manages to become colonial powers around or even a few decades before 1492, I'm seriously gonna flip. And the reason is simple. Despite Paradox games being alternate history games where things can happen much faster than in history, it's often a staple of these games that technology and innovations stick relatively close to historical counterparts. For example, in EU4, you get a large ahead of time penalty to research if you attain a tech before its historical date, but it massively increases the more years you add on, and it's almost impossible to be, say, 10 years ahead of the historically accurate date for an innovation due to the penalty. Good ships and navigational skills were needed to reach the Americas after all, and I hope that much like in EU4, that these will be tough to obtain in the early game, because what I truly want EU5 to be is a game that feels different from EU4 in that early game. I crave that end of the Middle Ages theme, and honestly, I hope it lasts as long as possible. Number 2. The danger of too much micro. Now let me make like Obama and be clear.
Let me be clear.
I love good micromanagement. The spreadsheet simulation is what Paradox games are all about after all. But there still is a big difference between a game like Crusader Kings 2 and Hearts of Iron 4 and Victoria 3, where the latter two games demand so much more careful management and detailing. EU4 was always kind of the perfectly warm bowl of porridge in this sense, being more complex than Crusader Kings, but still revolving much more around the grand political and societal movements than about the technical inspection of guns and armor types. This is, I think, a big reason why EU4 felt so good, because it allowed for a sense of immersion by way of national ideas, government innovations, and things like estate mechanics, all the while you're still on a quest to perform royal marriages that turn into personal unions and often conquer most of the world. While I do think there are parts of, say, Imperator Rome and Victoria 3 that are amazing because they are so detailed, as in the case of the pop and trade systems, and I absolutely welcome their additions by the way, I hope they don't completely alter the pacing of the game to an unrecognizable state. That's because I think a big part of the EU4 allure is exactly that possibility to wage wars, to make those relatively large territorial changes, and to feel like you're actively making a difference. Of course, EU4 does limit you in many aspects, for example through overextension, instability, and aggressive expansion, but the penalty for waging wars or being a bit of a troublemaker is not at all the same as in, say, Wiki 2 or 3, where large conquests are much rarer than in a game like EU4. And you know, that absolutely makes sense for Wiki 3, not just because of the time span of roughly 100 years, but because of the historical time period as well, as large wars between major powers were a lot rarer post the Napoleonic Wars and until World War I. In EU5's time period though, literally starting with the 100 Years' War and actually ending with Napoleon, Europe was the most war-torn shithole you can imagine. It's literally the time of the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the 7 Years' War, a lot of wars named after the amount of years they lasted essentially, and that's never a good thing. But it is a good thing for war, and indicates that war, the possibility of conquest and of blobbing, should at least be an option. And I don't mean that in a overextension is just a number kind of thing, I mean it in something that's generally reminiscent of how wars are in EU4. That being said, I don't mind a minor change here, as EU5 does pivot toward more realm and economy management mechanics, which is all fine and good. I just hope the game doesn't lose its soul is what I mean, and that we'll still be able to create our globe-spanning empires without constantly tiptoeing around our neighbors. Number 3. The UI. I've talked about the UI before and I'm definitely not the first. In fact, everyone and their EU4 playing mother are talking about EU5's UI. Now the thing is, what we have seen thus far is a work in progress. In fact, everything is. So without having played it yet and before release, I can only judge based on what I've seen and accordingly what I know at this stage. The UI in strategy games serve not only a functional utility, in that it's literally what allows you to do anything, but more than that, the UI is our gateway into these worlds that for the most part are made up of just maps. Now I love the maps, mind you, in fact, I have one waiting for me in bed right now, but the UI is still the bread and butter for the dessert that the maps make up. In this way, the UI is what makes you feel like you're actually going to war. It's what makes you feel like your empire is sprawling with various peoples, cultures, and religions. It's where you learn how powerful you actually are, how large your army is, which alliances you can trust, and in which halls of power your voice rings the truest. Therefore, the UI must necessarily be able to spark joy, spark engagement, spark immersion, and be the avenue through which we travel hundreds of years into the past and become ambitious. EU4 managed to do this by implementing unique windows for things like the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy, and modders took this idea further and made them even more beautiful and ornate. It's partly why I love the mission trees in EU4, because every mission has a unique piece of artwork that feels so freaking good to click and bring color to. Despite every faction sharing the same general UI appearance, it's what makes the focus trees in Hearts of Iron 4 feel so immersive, because each focus is more or less carefully tailored to each nation, especially for those unique moments in history. I am sure Paradox has spent a lot of time on the UI, but I just needed to look more aesthetically pleasing, to look a little more worn and lived in, and to feel like I'm not just clicking big, blue, modern feely buttons, but something a little more tactile and early modern chic. And I really hope Paradox can deliver that, because I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in feeling this way. Oh, and Paradox, please for the love of God remove my character's face in the top corner of the screen, at least make it optional. It just feels a bit weird when I'm not playing CK2 or 3, and I'd rather just have my large, gilded coat of arms up there instead. Thank you, please. Number 4. Those 3D modeled characters. I recognize that I might be coming off as an old man yelling at clouds at this point, but I have to say that I was never sold on the 3D characters to begin with, not even for CK3. They're not ugly or anything, but they do look cartoony or a little out of place in games that want you to feel anything but, and rather than pulling me into these worlds, they often take me out of them. One of my least favorite aspects of CK3 is that characters feature in literally every pop-up event, with various weird poses and whatnot that looks anything from alright to completely goofy. My fear here is that EU5 will do the same. As evident from work in progress events, whether it be the 100 Years' War, the Holy Roman Empire, or the papacy, the characters are always in focus, taking that focus away from the event or institution itself, and directing it once more towards the 3D characters. That is a big mistake in my opinion, and I find that it cheapens what's actually going on here, especially in cases like the 100 Years' War window, which you can see has a beautiful work of art behind the characters, and now there are even 2 of them. In other words, if Paradox insists on having 3D characters, I won't be a hater, but I also don't want to see them in every darn window, and I hope they pivot to a more classic approach to UI windows that put the event or theme itself front and center. After all, we're not playing CK3 here. Number 5, and lastly, I want to talk a bit about the music. I have not played EU5, and I know Paradox has an upcoming feature on the music of the game in a few weeks from now, but if there is one aspect of EU4 that keeps me hyped, on my toes, and lures me into the most beautiful immersive trances, it is the soundtrack of EU4. Andreas Valdetoft was the composer for every classic Paradox game up to and including CK3 if my memory serves me, but now I believe he has left the throne. His musical genius continues to astound me, and truly, I find him to be one of the finest composers of our time, especially perhaps for the Stellaris soundtrack, and whoever takes up the mantle of composer for EU5 has big shoes to fill. That's not to say it cannot be done. Imperator Rome has an incredible soundtrack, and Victoria 3 has many fine tunes as well. My hopes then is that whoever composes for EU5 manages to make music that feels melodic and unique, and who manages to avoid tracks that feel grand but generic, in favor of truly epic and singular tracks that only a Paradox game can offer. Those were the 5 biggest mistakes and missteps EU5 must avoid to truly succeed on launch in my opinion, even though we can of course also include things like general performance and AI capability. But those were my big 5, and now I want to hear yours. So, what are your hopes and fears for EU5? Make sure to leave a like on the video, a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!